The conflict in Syria is making global headlines as opposition forces in the country make advances, freeing Damascus, as they say, the country's capital, from the control of the government of Bashar al-Assad, who has led Syria since 2000. This is a massive development in the country's civil war that has been continuing since 2011. But who exactly are the opposition forces? Who exactly is Bashar al-Assad, his policies, and what exactly does this mean for the conflict in Syria? Joining us to explain all of these questions is Dr. Waiel Awwad, who is a senior investigative reporter, someone who has covered conflicts in South Asia and across the world for the last 4 decades. Dr. Awwad, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. Can you begin by telling us what exactly is happening on the ground in Syria? We're seeing news of these opposition forces making major advances against government forces, taking control of major cities, including Damascus. What exactly is happening on the ground?
Thank you for having me. In fact, I can tell you that the Syria has fallen and the president fled the country and most of his senior officials are unknown whereabouts. So the opposition forces led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was affiliated to Al-Qaeda and to ISIS, which is also Gulani himself. He was having $10 million in his head by the American. Now he is leading the forces and have taken over all over Syria. So except for little of the seaside cities where there could be another front to open. At the moment, Damascus has fallen and there is a call for an interim government till they settle down the issues. They are not showing so much of killing of civilians. There is no attack or revenge killing. But having said that, I would say it's too early to judge the outcome and these forces, how they will behave with the minorities in Syria. Is it a Syrian-led movement? Is it seriously a rebellion, or is it the opposition? We need to find out. But I can compare this because we are in India. That this look like Bangladesh in the making, or it could be Afghanistan in the making as well.
Could you tell us a little bit about the opposition forces in question? Who exactly are they? Who are their leaders? What exactly do they believe? And is there any unity among the various opposition forces? Because we've heard about Kurdish forces, the Syrian Democratic Forces, we've heard about the HTS. Who exactly are the opposition forces right now in Syria who are making these advances against the armies of Bashar al-Assad?
See, the Syrian crisis started in 2011 when the Arab Spring started in most of the Arab capitals from Tunisia and spread into Syria. People of Syria were thinking that they can repeat the same there. So they have taken a peaceful demonstration for more than 6 months. And then suddenly it was taken by the Islamist forces, which has led in Egypt and Tunisia and Libya. So we were anticipating that this become more violence, and that's why the people of Syria lost their aspiration. After that, there was an attack on many of the Syrian cities, including Aleppo, which was under the rebels that time, and then the Syrian government, with the help of Russia and Iran and the Popular Fronts of Iraq and Hezbollah of Lebanon, they liberated the cities and northern part of Syria. The northern eastern part occupied by the United States, the northern western part occupied by the Turkish. So we have almost 35% of Syrian territories remain under occupation. Then the Turkish Idlib province they have occupied, they start turning it into a province of Turkey, and the teaching, syllabus, school, language, currency, everything was Turk. So they had more than 60,000 terrorist organization based in Idlib. So when the Syrian government had a deal with the Astana conference between Syria, Iran, Turkey, and Russia, they agreed in 2019 there should be a truce, there should be no attack on those positions. But I believe the war on Gaza, the Israelis' attack on the onslaught going on in Palestine and then followed in Lebanon, have led to the phase 2 of the operation to destabilize, disintegrate Syria. So when Netanyahu sent a warning to Syrian president, and he told him 26th of November that you're playing with fire, the next day the attack happened after the intelligence meeting between Israelis and the Turkish government. So these forces actually led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was nothing but al-Nusra Front, which was nothing but Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which is under the United Nations Security Council resolution as a terrorist group. But because they're giving them a moderate look of a Syrian opposition and rebellions that they're against the current government in Syria, so these are led by Takfiri, by jihadist group, who are more than 31 actually groups, and all of them are supported, funded, and trained by the American, by the Israeli Mossad, and by the Turk, who turned their country into a hub for the terrorist organization. So they have taken the lead. I'm saying this because we do not know the future of Syria. Is it going to be really an opposition or the government, the new government, the new hopes for the Syrian people? Then let's all hope that it can happen. If it started to start the attack on minorities and all, then we can understand the actual skin of those organizations led this attack, because all of them were armed, were trained, were with the drones, with the tanks, with the anti-missiles by the Turkish government. So is Turkey seriously interested in seeing Syria's sovereignty and integrity remain intact? Then why the Turkish flag is already flying over the castle of Aleppo, and they are eyeing the part of Syria and Iraq as well. So I think there are lots of questions to be answered, and too early to judge what's the outcome and who are these behind it. But I can say that these are different forces. We heard the Uzbek language, we heard the Tajik language, we heard the Turkish language, and even North Marrakesh area, the province there, the Northern African state. So less of Syrian, more of mercenaries.
I understand. So, if could I ask you also to explain, perhaps to an Indian audience, one of the key figures that has come forward in terms of the Syrian opposition forces, of course, is Abu Muhammad al-Julani. Lots of conversation about him, someone who was picked by this leader of the Islamic State, al-Baghdadi, to establish a branch of the Islamic State in Syria. Now, of course, is portraying himself to be much more of a pragmatist, much more of a moderate. Could you explain who this figure is, al-Julani, what his belief and his ideology is, what it could mean possibly for the future of Syria?
Well, his real name is Ahmad al-Shara, and he was given al-Golani because of his village where he belonged when the Golan, occupied Syrian Golan area. So when he was supported by Al-Qaeda founders of Palestinian and Jordanian, they formed Al-Qaeda in Syria and Iraq. And the branch with al-Zarqawi, the Jordanian guy, was killed by the American later. And these people established in Iraq. And in fact, there was a $10 million award on his head, bounty by the United States. But I believe it has no meaning, because now he joined hand with the Americans. So therefore, let's be very clear on this. If terrorism is being used as a tool to achieve political objective, I think Golani was the right choice for the United States and vested interest nation to destabilize this part of the world. Golani himself has taken part, and then he left from Iraq, came into Syria, and he formed his Hayat Tahrir al-Sham al-Nusra group, which was affiliated to Al-Qaeda. He declared loyalty to ISIS, then he pulled out, then he went to Al-Qaeda, then he pulled out, then he formed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And he made sure that most of the Syrian groups are under his arms, and he eliminated many of them, and he took the lead, because we know the kind of a deal he reached with the American and he reached with the Israelis and the Turk, that to take over Syria, to push out the Hezbollah, the Iranian out of that, even the Russian military bases in Syria. So we can't see what's developing in Syria with this kind of figure in the power. What could be the future, and it cannot be seen in isolation to what's happening in the big power play games.
Right. Dr. Awwad, if I could also ask you for a little bit of perspective, until a couple of years ago, the idea was very much that the government led by Bashar Assad had managed to take back a lot of territory in Syria, had managed to stabilize the government, had the military support of Iran as well as Russia. Could you explain a little bit, lots of questions being asked now about Russia's military support. Was the lack of military support from Russia responsible for the fall of Assad's government, because the Syrian army doesn't seem to have performed very well? What exactly has triggered this fall? Is it a lack of international support for the Assad government, and is it political mistakes made by Assad at home? What exactly triggered this fall?
I think you give the answer to all your questions. In fact, it is one of the major problems in Syria is the domestic issue, where the government, after liberating most of the Syrian, 65% of the Syrian territory was under the government hands, and only the northern part of Syria was under the American, where they were supporting Kurdish forces, and under Turkey, where they're supporting all these groups. But I believe the American sanctions on Syria for the last more than a decade have caused lots of harsh conditions for the Syrian people, and the currency fall down, inflation, unemployment, and it was very difficult to maintain with the corruption and malpractice by certain members of the government. In fact, that is what have made life miserable for the Syrian people because of these. At the similar fashion, they have done it in Iraq before the invasion of Iraq, and then this has happened in Syria. So therefore, there were lots of group active inside. There are lots of money flowing for the finding a sleeping cell or finding an opposition to the government. And Assad government bear the responsibility on this, the domestic issue. Having said that, also I will always say that because of our geopolitical location of Syria, it made it in the eyes of the storm of many of the neighboring countries, including Israel, including the Turkish interest and the American interest in this part of the world. So we know that this integration of Syria was on the card because it's considered the vital, pivotal country playing in the axis of resistance from Iran to Iraq to Syria, Lebanon, to Hamas, and also extended to this Ansarullah Houthis in Yemen. So all that axis has to be broken so the Israeli hegemony can remain, and also the what we call the American new Middle East order plan can be implemented, because Trump is coming, Netanyahu in power. He reached a deal of a ceasefire in Lebanon in one condition, that he wanted to finish Gaza and he wanted to take on Iran. So I think as Damascus fall, a secular country fall, we don't know the future. What will be the future of Syria? So all these factors have played a major role in bringing down the government. And the swift of this is because of the Turkish, nothing else but the Turk and the American GPS satellite who give all the maps of the Syrian army. And they have intercepted the intelligence the system of Syrian government, where the troops were pulling out. They thought these are the instruction from their superior or their officer, but it turned out to be all fake. And I think the people of Syria, thinking that it could be a revolution of domestically driven revolution, then they joined and didn't want to fight. But we don't know. This is how they did in many countries like Bangladesh, you know. So we don't know, is it repeating Bangladesh here, or are we repeating Afghanistan?
Right. Dr. Awwad, you've actually raised a very important question. That's what I wanted to ask you in terms of India has had a diplomatic relationship with the Assad government over these last 13 years, even after the civil war began. Because we've had Syrian leaders come to India, including the foreign minister. We maintain a diplomatic relationship. India has given aid, and much of the concern, of course, India also shared many of the world's concerns about the rise of the Islamic State in Syria. Now, of course, you're seeing someone who is linked to the Islamic State, Abu Jalani, be someone who is, of course, right at the head of the forces that are going to replace Assad in power. How do you think India is likely to see this? Should India be worried about the rise of someone like al-Jalani to power?
Absolutely. I think every country has to be worried about it. If you wanted to give upper hand and lose in all this, extremist group, then today is Damascus, tomorrow Baghdad, then Tehran, then could be New Delhi, God forbid. But these are the way of spreading terrorism all over the world. So I think if there is, India has to be concerned, because there are lots of terrorist activity. You remember during ISIS, there was lots of Indian joint hand voluntarily in fighting along with the jihadists in Syria, who have come from 83 countries, more than 173,000 terrorists from all over the world. So all this have turned Syria into a hub of terrorism. Now, if the Syria secular fabrics is broken, then everything is get loose, and all options are open. So India has to be concerned, because India was one of the first country who have given a comprehensive fight against terrorism draft to the UN, which never been implemented. So let's see what they call them. Is it a good terrorism or a bad terrorism? And if Syria seriously survive the onslaught or does not disintegrate, then we may see next Egypt could be the next of bringing back revival of the Arab Spring and revival of the political Islam, which we may see it in many of the capital. I think that is the aim of destabilizing, disintegration of the Middle East, according to the American plan and the Israeli clean and break 1995.
Understood. Dr. Waiel Awwad, thank you so much for your time. Really one of the best commentators on the Middle East, one of the most experienced journalists who's covered conflicts here in South Asia as well as across the world. Thank you so much, Dr. Awwad, for your time. And thank you so much to our viewers for joining us here on India Today Global. We will keep you updated with the latest on the evolving civil war in Syria.